Good rising, Dr. Navi.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm great. Welcome back to Second Opinion with Dr. Ken Navi.
Okay.
Dr. Ken Navi can be reached at friendsofdrken@gmail.com for questions and inquiries. Dr. Ken, you mentioned a term yesterday, transgenerational epigenetics. Can you expound more on that term and what it means to us?
I will. But first, let me do a brief overview of some of the information we gave out in the last few days. One was we talked about how, and this picture represents a person and their genetic expression or genes. And we talked about the way in which environment can change a person's genetic expression through alteration of the gene expression through the epigene. And when we talk about epigenetic modifications, we're talking about things that can impact the environmental impact, like chronic stress, nutrition, toxins and pollutants, and that's like DDT, heavy metals like lead, arsenic, and mercury. You know, lead and mercury have been in the news lately. Lead because of the situation in Flint, Michigan. Mercury because of the situation with as it relates to vaccinations. Now, one of the things we want to talk about again is how we get a changing of the expression of the genes. Once a person is set, once their genetic foundation is set, it was once thought that was it, that it couldn't be any changes to the genetic expression and the fundamental aspects of the person's gene function, but that's not true. What we found is a piece of a piece of genetic material attached to the gene called the epigene, under these environmental conditions, will unfold and send a reaction to the gene, changing its expression, leading to physical disease and mental disease. Today we want to talk about transgenerational epigenetics, which means that a person who is impacted by epigenetic disease can pass the traits of that epigenetic disease on to their offspring. And the manner in which this occurs is like this. During the prepubescent and pubescent years, what do I mean by that? I'm not even going to spell that. During the period of gonadal maturity, when your your eggs and your testicles are maturing, that is a very critical period of time for the passing on of genetic traits and epigenetic traits from the parent to the offspring. If a person is impacted in this manner during the time of gonadal maturity, those traits will be imprinted inside the person's of DNA, and they can spread this epigenetic expression down transgenerationally. Very important as we talk about the movement forward, so to speak, in understanding epigenetic disease. Earlier in our discussions, we discussed how mental illness was directly related to some of the crime and violence that we're seeing in our community. And one of the ways it's done is through this transgenerational effect. Some of the things that are impacting the adult is passed on through the children environmentally and genetically. And this is what we're seeing more and more every day. Now, as we talk about the case for black reparations or black remedy, one of the things that has been said is that there is not competent proof. What do we mean by competent proof? That's a legal term that says that the people who bring in a civil action do not have evidence that they have an injury or current injury that can be directly related to the person that is going to be seen as the defendant in the case. And in our case, black reparations is centered upon finding the United States and predecessor companies that have been involved in the slave trade as being fundamentally responsible for some of the damage that we see in the community today. I call people who deny this information ancestral trauma deniers. What do I mean by that? They deny the chronic effect of the environment upon the genetic expression of the individual who or them or their parents has been impacted by that environmental stress. So what we're going to be looking at doing the classroom exercises starting on July 8th, what we're going to be looking at is how all of these things play a role, how ancestral trauma from the time that we were brought over to this country on slave ships on into the time that we spent in this hemisphere, the black diaspora, as you say, with the violence committed against us, the rape, the nutritional deficiencies because of the poor nutrition, the toxic environments that we were caused to live in, and just the basic stress of living while black in America. These things have to be factored in to some of the physical disease, mental disease, and transgenerational disease, epigenetic disease that we see in the community. The scientific evidence and the research that's been done on this is far-reaching, and if you look up the terms transgenerational, epigenetics, you'll see all of this information on countless numbers of studies that indicate that an individual's environment changes genetic expression, leads to physical disease and mental disease, and that these factors are transgenerationally passed down into the ancestors of those people through a process known as transgenerational epigenetics. I think I got a question coming.
What type of solutions are we talking about as far as exercising some type of plan to reverse, number one, the attack, number two, the conditions that we're met with, and three, preventative measures so that we don't have to deal with this in the future?
The only thing that's going to really reverse the effects of transgenerational epigenetics is environmental change. And environmental change could be improved nutrition, it could be the relief of chronic stress, and it could be the absolute removal of toxins and pollutants from the environment. If you look at I think one study showed 80% of African American children in Chicago live in a toxic environment, whether it's lead from the highways, arsenic and mercury from the coal-firing power plants, living near highways and byways that are high in lead, accumulation of lead in the atmosphere from gas burning. So when you look at that, when you look at all of this, we talk about changes. One of the other changes is diagnosis and treatment. I believe that there are many people in the community who would fare better with appropriate diagnosis of mental illnesses such as personality disorders, because I see it prevalent in our children. And if you look at what the terminology or the definition of a personality disorder is, you'll see that people with personality disorders often look and appear to be very normal, but when you begin to speak to them, the language and the verbiage that they're using, their presentation in the community, their ability to interact with others at employment opportunities, education, or just simple relationships is hampered by their illness. And what we're seeing honestly is that these epigenetic diseases are being transgenerationally passed down through into our children. So for 2016 moving forward, we need to talk about how the black community needs to learn more about transgenerational epigenetic disease, and we need to use that as a platform of discussion moving into the presidential elections. What is America prepared to accept in terms of their own responsibility for these diseases that are prevalent in the black community? Likewise, what is America willing to do about it?
Okay. Question for
yes.
you. Mm-hmm. This term that you coined there, ancestral trauma deniers.
Those are just people.
How does that compare to anti-Semitism?
Well,
what's the comparison?
I mean, one of the things that I appreciate about the Jewish community is their ability to galvanize and utilize their resources towards improving their condition. And one of the terms, they call it the Holocaust deniers. And a Holocaust denier is a person who actually acts as if the Holocaust didn't exist when we know it did. Same thing with ancestral trauma. We know as African Americans that there was a great injustice thrust upon us through the slave trade and all of the conditions we suffered from in the black diaspora. But you have people today, even black people, who make a claim as if this ancestral trauma plays no role at all on our present condition. That's similar to Holocaust deniers. We need to get out of this ancestral trauma denial and start recognizing that environment and our history in America has played a great role in the physical disease and mental disease that we're seeing in the black community today.
Do you think it's necessary or mandatory that we define this trauma and then give it a legal definition as the Jewish community has done? For instance, I was reading the definition of Semite, which means a person that has associated himself with the Arabic or Jewish community. Mm-hmm. So anyone going up against the Arabic-speaking or Jewish community could be deemed anti-Semitic. I'm thinking the same rationale is if there's not a way for a judicial body to hear the terminology of the damage under a word that they can recognize legally, they may be ineffective, good intention albeit, but may not have the resource or the mechanism or tool, device. So I'm thinking that if we could focus a little bit of attention around this ancestral trauma word and quantify it in the legal community, then we can begin to stop some of the actions that we continually address and we're told are not really happening, but we see the effects of them.
I think that that's the next step, and that's one of the things we're going to be talking about after the lectures and as we begin to organize moving through the summer in terms of having more of a comprehensive discussion on ancestral trauma in the Black community. So absolutely, we need to get people out of the denial and get people focused on the fact that ancestral trauma has played a key role in some of the problems that we're looking at in the community, and that the country needs to address this as a condition, ancestral trauma, and it is directly related to more on the case for Black remedy or Black reparations. Thank you. My name is Ken Nave, and that's all for today.